By late October, the Germans had a new problem in Stalingrad. A man and his rifle moving through the ruins so quietly that squads stopped crossing streets in daylight. Officers stayed low. Runners took the long way through rubble rather than risk open ground. Entire patrols were paralyzed by a shooter no one could even find. Every countermeasure failed. If they wanted him gone, there was only one answer left. Fly in the best marksman in Germany, a legend, sent to kill a legend. At the age of 12, Vasily Zaitsev's grandfather taught him to hunt, telling him, quote, "Shoot with a steady aim and look your prey in the eye. You're not a boy anymore." In 1937, at 22, he joined the Soviet Navy and rose to the rank of Chief Petty Officer. He ended up in Vladivostok as a clerk near the Chinese border, far from the front, watching the war unfold from a desk instead of a rifle sight. So when Germany broke the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in June 1941 and the Western Front collapsed, he volunteered for combat. His transfer was finally approved in mid-1942. Zaitsev was reassigned to the 284th Rifle Division and placed on a westbound train toward the collapsing front. In September 1942, the 284th finally reached the eastern bank of the Volga. Across the water lay what was left of Stalingrad. Days of bombing had gutted factories and fuel depots, leaving oil burning on the river in thick black sheets, while artillery on the western bank hammered what remained of Soviet defenses. On the night of September 22nd, Zaitsev's division began the crossing. German batteries fired methodically, landing shells in a straight, predictable sequence across the water. Aircraft swept low and raked the water with machine gun fire. Those who made it across pulled themselves onto the shattered western shore, the ground still shaking from the bombardment. Orders came immediately for them to move south toward Mamayev Kurgan and the Dolgi Ravine, where Soviet forces were barely holding on. Within days of arriving, Zaitsev took a bullet to the leg, which threw him down into the rubble. Before he could rise, a German soldier drove a bayonet into his back, the blade glancing off bone and sparing his life by inches. Medics pulled him deeper into the ruins, treating the wounds quickly before sending him back into the line. In Stalingrad, there was no rear, nor the promise of safety. Anyone who could still hold a weapon was pushed forward again. He picked up a standard Mosin-Nagant rifle from a fallen infantryman and rejoined his unit as it moved through the shifting front of the industrial district. In early October, as the 284th advanced along the edge of the Dolgi Ravine, a German machine gun, positioned high on Mamayev Kurgan, opened fire and pinned them instantly. Zaitsev lay among them in a shallow pocket of broken stone. Between bursts, he noticed the range was long, roughly 600 meters, and the target showed itself for only a moment. He steadied the Mosin-Nagant's iron sights, exhaled, and fired. The gunner folded over the weapon. Another German rushed in to take over. The man collapsed beside the first. A third soldier tried to bring the weapon back into action. Zaitsev's third shot struck before the gun could bark again. Word of the machine gun incident spread quickly along the line. The most important person to hear it was Colonel Nikolai Batyuk, known to his men as Bulletproof Batyuk for his habit of standing on the front line as often as they did. He immediately demanded to know who had taken the shots. When word reached him that a newly arrived rifleman from Vladivostok was responsible, he immediately ordered that the man be reassigned to sniper duties. The shattered factories, collapsed floors, and tight corridors created natural blinds and choke points where a single well-placed marksman could halt an entire assault. After months of open-step fighting, where German armor dictated every engagement, these ruins finally favored Red Army infantry. Soldiers began stalking the rubble on their own initiative, working alone or in pairs, and firing only when a key target appeared. This improvised sniper movement spread rapidly across the 62nd Army. One of its early pioneers was Alexander Kalentiev. Within the 284th, he had already earned a reputation for treating the ruins as a hunting ground. He had no formal sniper training, only a sharp eye and an instinct for reading terrain. Zaitsev met him during a brief lull when both took shelter in the same wrecked building. For several days, whenever the units fought in the same sector, Zaitsev stayed close. He watched Kalentiev choose sheltered positions, disappear behind debris, and time every movement with the battlefield's cadence. By early October, Zaitsev had already claimed several dozen victims with a non-scope Mosin Nagant. His growing tally became proof that a single rifleman could shape the fight. On October 16th, Colonel Nikolai Bulletproof Batyuk brought his new sniper to meet General Vasily Chuikov. The general had called his officers together for a brief field presentation. It wasn't anything formal, just a hurried gathering in the rubble near the Barakati factory to award Zaitsev the Medal for Valor. In the days that followed, Chuikov presented Zaitsev with a selected Mosin Nagant Model 1891-30 fitted with a PEM scope, one of the most accurate sniper rifles available. Capable of hitting a target at 800 meters, it was so reliable that even some German snipers preferred captured Soviet rifles over their own Mausers. With proper optics, Zaitsev's effectiveness increased sharply. His record was rising so quickly and so consistently that his commanders realized they needed more than a single marksman. Zaitsev was ordered to pick candidates and begin training others, just as Kalentiev had taught him. The group he would form later earned a nickname of its own, the Hares or the Rabbits, a play on his surname, which in Russian means hare. As his trainees grew more confident in their own work, Zaitsev expanded his role. With the trench periscope raised inches above shattered masonry, he mapped the German front line piece by piece, indicating machine gun nests buried under beams, tripwires stretched across stairwells, or silent approaches being prepared for night assaults. This information flowed straight to the rifle companies clinging to the Volga's edge. More than once, the accuracy of his observations meant the difference between an overrun position and a successful defense. Zaitsev and his pupils had turned the western bank into a place where the enemy could never be sure of a clean advance. German commanders had no choice but to delay and eventually abandon their attempts to push the 62nd Army into the river. General Chuikov, seeing his army was exhausted, knew morale mattered as much as ammunition. Zaitsev became the figure Chuikov needed. Soviet propaganda seized on him instantly. Radio Moscow broadcast his daily tallies in 23 languages. Red Star printed his techniques as if they were doctrine. Crude flyers, run off on battered presses in cellar workshops, carried his name through the ruins. For many soldiers, knowing Zaitsev was somewhere in the rubble, watching the same ground they fought and fell to hold, became its own kind of strength. The German response arrived quickly. Reports from across the front described a new pattern of clean, deliberate shots coming from unfamiliar angles, fired by men who did not reveal themselves a second time. These were trained Scharfschützen, equipped with precision-scope Mauser 98Ks, who'd been pushed into the sector with a single purpose: to counter the growing Soviet marksman threat. One evening, a captured German mentioned that Soviet fire, especially from Zaitsev, had caused such disruption that higher command believed a specialist explicitly sent to hunt him was required to deal with the problem. The first sign came the next morning, November 1st. Scouts spotted German infantry heading toward the small spring on Mamayev Kurgan, a place they visited at daybreak to collect water. Two of Zaitsev's Hares moved to intercept. Before they reached the positions, a single precise shot struck one of them down. Moments later, another bullet smashed cleanly through the other one's scope, missing his face by centimeters and destroying his ability to return fire. Such accuracy ruled out luck. Whoever was out there was skilled, patient, and already hunting Zaitsev's men. The very next day, Zaitsev chose Sergeant Nikolai Kulikov, one of his most capable students, as his partner. Before dawn, the two men crawled toward the stretch of ground where the Hares had been ambushed and settled into shallow cover, facing the German line. The first day went by in near total silence as Zaitsev inspected the terrain through his scope, studying every mound of dirt, every fragment of wall, every stray glint of metal. The second day unfolded much the same. On the third day, Battalion Commissar Danilov arrived to observe the situation when a shot cracked. He dropped instantly into the trench, wounded. Zaitsev caught no muzzle flash and no movement, only the impact. Hours later, while checking each feature of the terrain yet again, Zaitsev's attention returned to a sheet of metal lying flat in no man's land. It had been there from the start, but now he noticed a slight rise of disturbed soil beside it, barely perceptible unless one had memorized every contour. He raised a decoy helmet above the trench. A bullet tore straight through it from the precise angle he expected. Believing he had hit his target, the German raised his head for a moment. That was enough for Zaitsev to fire. That night, using the noise of scattered fighting as cover, he and Kulikov crawled out, lifted the sheet, and found the sniper inside. The documents on his body confirmed the identity: Major Koenig. His rifle went to Colonel Batyuk. The duel between Zaitsev and the so-called Major Erwin Koenig has become one of the most famous sniper confrontations in history, retold in memoirs, films, and novels as a clash between two master marksmen. However, once the smoke of Stalingrad cleared and historians sifted through records, the story proved far murkier than the legend suggests. The Major Erwin Koenig, described in Soviet accounts, simply does not appear in the Wehrmacht's records. No major of that name existed in any branch of the German military at the time. Furthermore, no senior sniper instructor from the Berlin school could have traveled to Stalingrad during that narrow 2-week window between Zaitsev's rise to fame in mid-October and the duel in early November. By then, the city was already encircled, and German logistics were strained to the breaking point. Yet the claim came from within Soviet lines. Colonel Batyuk was the first to mention Koenig. He was also the first to confirm the identity of the downed sniper. That alone raises questions. Soviet leadership was desperate for heroes, symbols that could stiffen exhausted troops at a moment when the 62nd Army was fighting with its back to the river. A duel between a celebrated Soviet hunter and a German master sniper fit perfectly with wartime propaganda. Still, the duel itself was as real and mortal as the tallies suggest. Modern research, including studies of surviving German unit diaries, points to a far more grounded explanation. The sniper Zaitsev faced was likely Gefreiter Hermann Stoff, the leading marksman of the Wehrmacht's 295th Infantry Division, which held positions on Mamayev Kurgan at that exact time. Just as his legendary counterpart, Stoff was skilled, experienced, and critically already present in the sector. He had 103 confirmed victories, a number consistent with a sniper capable of ambushing Zaitsev's students and wounding Commissar Danilov with a single, expertly placed shot. Whoever he was, he hunted Zaitsev for days and pushed him to the limits of endurance. Even if he wasn't a major, he wasn't from Berlin, and his name was almost certainly not Erwin Koenig. Days after the duel, the wider battle shifted into a far harsher phase. Temperatures plunged below freezing, locking rubble and corpses alike into jagged ice. What the Wehrmacht faced now wasn't just Zaitsev alone, but nearly 30 trained marksmen working across the sector. The Hares were now pushing outward, embedding themselves in the factories, workers' housing blocks, boiler rooms, and collapsed stairwells. Each pair controlled its own stretch of no man's land, creating overlapping arcs of fire that the enemy could neither predict nor map. With these new teams active, German infantry found that familiar routes were suddenly lethal. A cellar exit, a courtyard gap, or a smashed doorway might now fall under a newly established Soviet vantage point. Patrols began losing men at their edges, where runners vanished mid-stride, engineers collapsed before planting charges, or officers dropped while raising binoculars to identify a landmark. As Soviet counterattacks spread through the factory district, the Hares moved alongside them. Some teams advanced ahead of the infantry to watch German staging areas. Others remained behind to cut down reinforcements trying to plug gaps. Piece by piece, the German line lost the people who kept it functioning until entire firefights stalled, units frozen in place with no orders and no direction. Between November 10th and December 17th, Zaitsev accounted for 225 confirmed enemy casualties, including 11 German snipers, despite worsening weather. His trainees, operating across multiple sectors at once, inflicted far more. When Stalingrad finally tilted toward encirclement, Soviet records and surviving German reports alike indicated that the Hares had caused over 3,000 losses. Even then, Zaitsev's work was still not finished. January 1943 marked the collapse of the German Sixth Army. Surrounded, freezing, and starving, the remnants of General Friedrich Paulus's divisions fought in shrinking pockets as the Red Army closed in. Zaitsev remained in the ruins until the final weeks of the battle, advising his heirs and watching for the last German snipers who still posed a threat. During heavy fighting near the Barakati factory, a mortar round detonated close to his observation point. The shock hurled him to the frozen ground as fragments of metal and concrete struck his face. A shard cut across his brow. Others drove into both eyes. His comrades pulled him out of the rubble as more rounds struck nearby. Nearly blind and in severe pain, he was rushed to the Volga embankment and evacuated across the river under fire. Because of his importance to the Soviet command, Zaitsev was transferred to Professor Vladimir Filatov, one of the country's leading ophthalmologists. Over multiple operations, Filatov restored enough vision for him to see shapes and light again, and over the following days, his sight slowly improved. By mid-February, Zaitsev could see well enough to return to frontline duty. He was promoted and awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union and the Order of Lenin, in recognition of months of work during some of the harshest fighting of the war. Once recovered, he returned to combat and trained additional snipers. Later, as the Red Army advanced westward, he briefly commanded a rifle regiment during the later stages of the war. In April 1945, during the battle for the Zelo Heights, the last major German defensive line before Berlin, a burst of artillery shrapnel wounded him badly enough to be pulled from the line. The injury ended his chance to take part in the final assault on the capital. His life ended in 1991 at the age of 76, just 11 days before the Soviet Union dissolved. Initially buried in Kyiv, he was reinterred in 2006 in Volgograd, the former Stalingrad, with full military honors, fulfilling his final wish. His wartime total is generally estimated at around 242 confirmed enemy casualties, though some historians believe the actual number may have been closer to 400.